Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Agahi. This is your host Varisa Zainab, and today we have a fantastic guest on the show, Dr. Haidar al Hakim, who is the podcast host for um, Surgical Spirit, and he's also an author of a book on professional burnout. He's a psychoanalyst and an ophthalmologist, and inshallah, we'll be discussing about lots of things that professionals face and how it impacts their mental health, and how psychoanalysis can be useful in treating a lot of issues. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Haidar. Welcome to the show.
Alaikum assalam, Warisa. Thank you so much for having me here. And what a lovely picture behind you. You know,
Thank
spring is
you.
in the air.
It is, yeah, indeed. When you're confined to the four walls of your home, you have to bring some color in to change your mind and shift your perspective.
And
So,
they've left the cage. The birds have left the cage, and now they're out in the open.
yeah, they're free to fly.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Haider, first of all, please tell me about your book. What motivated you to write something like this?
Yeah, well, I think I've always been interested in self-development, I guess. Finding a way of improving oneself, making one's experience more pleasurable, always learning, and always wanting to become a new human being. So I've always been interested in self-development, and I think once I went through my own difficulty, so I went through a lot of let's say internal turmoil and internal conflict.
Mm,
I was working in Iraq at the time, doing charity work in Najaf,
mashallah.
and yeah, I psychologically burnt out,
Mm,
and this caused me to physically burn out, and then this was noticed by my loved ones and my friends,
yeah.
and I realized that I needed some help, so I started going into the field of psychology, so to speak. I mean, I'm a ophthalmologist by training, so I'm a very physically orientated individual. Uh, not really into the arts of the psyche. But then I realized that the psychological world is just as important as the physical world, and I delved into that, and I saw a life coach at the time,
Right.
who was based in Canada. And yeah, that sort of opened my eyes and opened my perspective. And I realized that that my story was something worth sharing. And that's how I mean, that's the reason why I wrote the book, because I knew that because I realized that other people are going through burnout as well. And
Yes.
burnout is a
Yeah.
very common thing. I mean, it's, it has a kind of a corporate professional clothing to it. But in essence, it's where you lose your internal energy, your psychological energy.
So that's how
You lose,
you transitioned from looking into eyesight to people's insight.
yeah, exactly. And when you're sitting with the patient and they've got perfect vision
Hmm.
physically, and yet they're still complaining about their vision.
Yeah.
And as you know, we have an external compass, and then we have an internal compass.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
this internal compass that people lose sometimes, and it is a kind of a midlife issue. So I see this quite commonly in people, once they get into the 30s and 40s and 50s, where they have become successful in terms of career and sort of family and financially,
Yeah.
and yet there's something inside of them that tells them, well, no, you're not there yet. There's a bit more work for you to do. So there is this kind of disconnect between physical and internal. And I realized that the internal world is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think, but it's a difficult one, because you need to have the physical side of things
Yes.
okay. So if you don't have adequate shelter, if you don't have adequate warmth, if you don't have adequate food, if you don't have a good long-term stable relationship with a spouse, you can't really do the internal work, because these basic physical things haven't been met.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
important to understand that if your basic physical things are not met, then dealing with, the next step, which is whether that's psychological or spiritual, doesn't actually work. It doesn't make sense, and it's actually counterproductive.
So you
Which
basically have to be in a like state where you're physically healthy. As
Yeah,
they say, a healthy body is a good healthy mind. So it's
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
interlinked.
yeah. I think the body comes first,
Yeah.
and then the mind. Obviously, sometimes we're born with really bad disability,
Mm.
um, but to a certain extent, you still need some physical safety to start off with.
Yeah, definitely.
Once you have that, then the next step is actually to work on the insides, and I think working on the psychology side of things comes before the spiritual side of things, which is
Definitely.
outside your spiritual, outside your internal world. So you have your own internal world, then you have an external internal world,
Yeah.
which is the
Yeah.
realm of spirituality. So
I
yeah, I
mean,
mean, yeah, that's why I sort of wrote the book. I mean, I do come from a very religious family in Najaf.
oh,
My uncle is an Ayatollah.
mashallah.
My granddad was a well-known uh, uh, representative of a well-known Ayatollah. My father-in-law is a well-known Ayatollah. So I've always been in a kind of, let's say, traditional spiritual upbringing,
Yeah.
which gives you a kind of understanding that there's more to life than just the physicality of things. So in a sense, I grew up within the psychological world, but I didn't put any formality to it because I
Right.
treated it as a kind of cultural religious thing rather than a reality thing. And some of us as professionals maybe separate the two, that we think that they're separate, that my
Yeah.
professional life is different from my cultural and spiritual life. But what I've realized is actually they're all very intertwined. And
Yeah.
the reason why we become certain professionals is because of our culture and our religion and our internal spiritual makeup. So there is a marrying of the two, an intertwining
Definitely.
of the two. But you
So,
tend to find this afterwards rather than
mm, I'm
when we're
glad
young.
you mentioned the spiritual side of things because the holy month of Ramadan is associated with like building your spirituality and your taqwa and piety. And most people struggle because it's already quite difficult to manage your worldly life and your spiritual life. And especially with the pandemic and people who are working in the front line, they're experiencing a lot of burnout.
Yeah, yeah,
Anxiety levels have increased, levels of depression has increased. People are already, experiencing a lot of mental health difficulty, and things are
yeah.
not getting easier.
I mean,
So,
I think it's important to separate what the news and what the media are
mm,
telling you and brainwashing you, and what
yeah,
the reality of things are. So when we perpetuate the message or the narrative that mental health is going up, that anxiety is going up, that is a story, that is a narrative, that is a foundation that's created in order to drive a certain industry. So I'm quite careful to sort of say these things. So I don't say that these things are getting worse. They've always been around.
yeah,
Um, they'll always exist. So it's important to realize that the language changes with times.
yes,
So I don't personally think that, in essence, anxiety has gone up, but the language of anxiety is being used much more often now. It's
right,
become more acceptable to talk about these things,
mm,
within the general population and, within the general populace. I think in terms of Ramadan,
yeah,
Ramadan is an interesting time because we're going away from something that we're so reliant on, which is the physical world,
yeah,
and we're in a sense being pushed into the non-physical world. So if you're not used to that, if that's the first time you've done it in the year, or
yeah,
it's the first time you've done it in many years,
yeah,
then it is a bit of a shock because we live within the body,
Yeah.
and the body is a very powerful tool to affect us. So if you're attached to your body quite intimately, then it is a bit of a shock to the system.
Mm.
So if you're not the type of person who is quite, let's say, introspective, that always reflects about what's going on inside of them, not reflecting about their internal thought process, internal behaviors, um, what makes them up, what makes them down, what
Yeah.
triggers them, what makes them happy, unhappy, angry, frustrated, lonely, bubbly. So then it's a difficult time because you are forced away from your physical world,
Mm.
and then you have to deal with this. So it is a bit of a shock to the system to start off
Yeah.
with, which is why, the first week of Ramadan, which is where we are on this show, then it is a bit of a shock to the system. But from this shock comes balance. So, after you've had for example, God forbid, your tire
Yeah.
blows and, you get the initial shock of what's going on.
Mm.
But then you realize that you steady the ship, you slow the car down, you start breathing, and
Yeah.
then you deal with the aftermath. So, you start realizing that actually the human body is not just composed of the physical side.
Yeah.
There's also a very big, what we call a metaphysical side, an
Mm.
internal world, which is just as vast, just
Yeah.
as important. And one can argue even more important because, let's be honest, most of us have got a decent degree of physical safety
Yeah.
and physical warmth, and food's available everywhere. The percentage of absolute poverty around the world has gone down dramatically,
Yeah. Yeah.
which means that we're going away from the basic physical and we are being forced to look inside of us. And, we're in a very lucky position because, Islam is about looking within.
Yes.
It is about our internal character, is about in our internal values. So, it's a kind of a win-win for us because
Mm.
we are not strangers to these things.
Yeah.
Is not something that we have to start from fresh. So Muslims in the Eastern culture, it's in the eastern part of the world, it's very normal. It's a
Mm.
normal practice. Muslims in the West, it's a bit more difficult because they are so used to the physicality of the world, so used to the materialistic part of the world. It's a bit more of a struggle, and I think a burnout per se, is more of a Western kind of issue rather than
Right.
a sort of an Eastern issue. Having said that, the East is becoming more and more West.
Mm.
There
That's
is
true. Yeah. Yeah.
Westernization of the East.
Mm.
So, whatever the United States get, the East gets it after about 20 years or so because it sort of
Yes.
slowly filters in over there. And but everything has a foundation,
Yeah.
and if the foundation is Islam and the East, then it's really important to look within, and and that's the start of who you are. It's who you are inside, rather than the skin and the material side of things.
Well,
Sorry, it's a bit of a rant, yeah,
no, no, no.
but I
It
think,
makes perfect sense. And I was thinking because, mashallah, you had the opportunity to be exposed to religious traditions and
mm, mm,
Islamic, way of life in an ideal
mm.
situation, which most people are not exposed to, especially people
Yeah,
living in the West,
and
for
yet
example.
I kind of rejected it because I went to Western medicine, really.
Yeah.
So I went away from traditional, Eastern religious and sort of Eastern medicine, and I kind of went Western. And what I realized is that there is so much wisdom in the East.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
so much wisdom in the metaphysical aspect of healing and of getting better and of being in a state of well-being. The physical side of thing is essential, because if you don't have a good physical body, you won't, you can still overcome it with your mind.
Yes.
And we know lots of people who are in very bad physical state, and yet They are of great character and of sort of great being. You can sit with them, and they're just amazingly positive. Speaking on a, sort of using a Western term there, and you're just in awe of them because they're in such a dire physical state, and yet they lift you up spiritually just by being around them. But
Yeah.
it takes a lot of internal practice, and really Ramadan has come here to allow us to get away from the physical side of things, which does gives us, it does give us well-being,
Mm.
the physical side of things,
Yeah.
but it allows us to start that process of working on the muscle of the internal world. And I
Yeah.
think that's where, the importance of doing the internal Ramadan work. But the
Yeah.
halal is great. The meat is great. The rice is great after the fast. And no one's gonna, deny that.
I was thinking, like you mentioned, some people, despite the fact that they may not be in a very comfortable state physically, maybe their physiological needs are not being met, but
Yeah,
still they are very resilient.
yeah,
They show a lot of gratitude, and
yeah,
they're quite content with everything around them. And then you see people who are blessed with everything, and they're still not satisfied and happy, and there's no gratitude. I mean, looking at what our faith teaches us, I mean, fasting is all about self control, not just controlling our physiological desires, but also our mind, that there are things available in front of you, but you deliberately withhold yourself from utilizing them.
yeah,
How can we, even after the month of Ramadan, how can we practice self-control? How can we,
yeah.
um, you know, practice this on a daily basis, regardless of whether it's Ramadan or not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, an important thing. I mean, I like to stay away from the word control because I think, from a psychoanalytical point of view, if you talk about control, that means you're denying yourself something, and when you deny yourself something, you push it into your what you call the shadow, which is your dark side. Anything that's
Right.
undesirable you consider to be undesirable.
Mm.
You shut it off and you put it away. And if you put it away, it comes back stronger eventually,
Mm.
and it tends to
Yeah.
cause more trouble uh, afterwards than it would have done dealing with it at the start. Coming back to your question, I think it's really simple. Most of what we think we need, we don't need. We actually want it.
Yeah.
So it's a want rather than a need.
Mm.
And in Ramadan, we realize that what we think we need, we don't need it. It's just a want.
Yeah.
It's a construct within our brain that we think we need it, but we don't need it. We just want it. And you realize that us as human beings have very few needs. And the important need, which you mentioned, which is a need for all of us,
Yeah.
is the need of gratitude,
Mm.
the need of saying Alhamdulillah, and the need of saying Subhanallah. These are needs, much more than the material, the position, the cultural aspects of our upbringing. People realize that actually this is what we need, and they tend to be values. They tend to
Yeah.
be esoteric issues,
Mm.
hidden issues,
Yeah.
what we call symbols. What we need is certain symbols in our lives. Symbols are things that need interpretation.
Right.
They're not like signs. A sign is, you're driving down the road, it says don't turn left.
Mm.
That's obvious. That doesn't need interpretation.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
sign is that you're driving down the road, you see a McDonald's. Now that's a symbol. Now what does that mean? What does that mean related to you? What is it part of that? What is it about McDonald's that you think you need?
Yeah.
And in most instances, you don't need it whatsoever. So most of the things that we truly need are in the interpretive spiritual realms
Right.
rather than the obvious physical realm. Um, yeah. Is this too deep? I don't think so. I think, we all have a kind of movement towards something that we feel is really important for us.
Mm.
Um, when we start off as children, it tends to be physical needs.
Yeah.
So physical need is very powerful.
Mm.
In the first 7 years, very powerful. Then we start developing our psychological needs.
Mm.
And then eventually, by the time we're about 14 or 15, we're pretty much over the need areas. And then we start going into the wants, but then we mix the two up, you see. We think that the
Yes.
wants or needs, but they're not. So realizing, through the month of Ramadan that most of what we have is actually superfluous and non-essential. And what's essential is gratitude,
Yes.
is the family, is your contribution to other people in society, is your own self-development, is your own self-growth,
Mhm.
um, which are very, يعني, it's not very tangible, you know,
Yes.
because it's a very personal concept.
Mm.
Um, but at least you've got a month to think about these things.
Yes. Yeah.
And, this is where Ramadan comes in.
Talking about self-reflection, for some people, it can be a very scary experience. To I come across people who are like, we don't want to think about our past. We don't want to think about what we have said or what we did, because it kind of gives rise to a lot of emotions that they don't want to confront, they don't want to acknowledge. But
Yeah,
then
yeah.
being in a state of denial doesn't help, because cognitive
No,
avoidance is never going to change the situation for you or for anyone
it
else.
always makes it worse. It always makes
Exactly.
it worse. And, it boils down to the fact that we're human beings. All human beings make mistakes.
Yeah.
And the question is, how quickly do you own your mistake?
Hmm.
How quickly do you do it? If it's instantly, great. At least there's less aftermath to deal with.
Hmm.
Because a mistake causes a sort of a disruption in your spirit, and if other people are involved, then other spirits,
Yeah.
and that all causes a bit of rift within the universe. So how quickly do you own it?
Hmm.
That's the first step. And then um, what how are you gonna heal or bring the parties together or find some kind of joint healing process, and then what have you learned from it?
Yeah.
And then the next big question is, are you going to do it again?
Yeah.
you know so I think, when I wrote my book, it is really a book of my mistakes, because I knew that there's so much on my chest that I had to get off,
Yeah.
because I knew that was weighing me down, and I was just keeping hold of all these mistakes. And I guess maybe it's a bit extreme putting out in public, but I thought that this was the only way you can really own your we need to go away from this kind of narrative that, perfection, and
Yeah, definitely.
this is the ideal Shia and Muslim and
I
Sunni, or
think,
whatever.
apart from the Holy Prophet and his holy progeny, I don't think any human being can be perfect. We all have our
They've worked
flaws,
hard
and
to get to that
yeah,
position.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
They've worked hard to get to that position, and yet, if they made anything that they felt was slightly below their standard, they'll be the first people to own up to it and say, yes, I was below my standard there, and rectified any problems that could have caused other people. So
And I guess,
this sort of
yeah, I mean,
honesty of self.
for most of us, I think we will do something and regret later on, or we will commit a sin and then kind of repent. But with the holy household, they wouldn't even think about committing a sin. So it seems like they practiced a lot of mind control, or their mindsets or their perceptions was way stronger than ours.
Well, I think they grew up in a household where um, honesty with themselves
Yeah.
and honesty with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and just being truthful. And I think, you know, truth is not easy, particularly when it applies to yourself. It's always easy to point out truth to other people,
Yeah.
but the most difficult thing is when you start being truthful to yourself. And you
Yes.
know, you're the best judge of yourself.
Mm.
And in my opinion, you know, the reason why people get, you know, uneasy, upset, things are not working out for them, is because they haven't been truthful to themselves.
Mm.
And this manifests in these different, you know, not very beneficial ways of thinking and behaving, and emotions and thoughts and so on.
Yeah.
Sometimes, you know, we can get these things from previous generations. So,
Yes.
you know, we do inherit not just the genes, but also the thoughts and the practices and the behaviors
Mm.
and the mindsets of previous
Yes.
generations,
Absolutely.
which is why it's really important to study your ancestry. You know, your
Yeah.
parents and your grandparents and your great grandparents. Study them, just like you study any topic in school. You know, if you've
Yeah.
got an exam, you study all the details um, of the subject. If you start, you know, us as I mean, me as a middle-aged man. I mean, you know, you're still in your teens. You
I
know,
wish.
when I, you know, when I it must be the filter. When you know, when I see my dad, I think, oh my God,
Mm.
there are so many things that he does that I do.
Yeah.
So many great things that he does, I don't do. You know, so many. Well, he doesn't do any bad stuff, but you know that I do the bad, and I think, oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, you know, I look at I mean, I didn't, unfortunately, my granddad passed away before I was born. But when I look at his history, I was like, oh my God, you know, this
Mm.
is, I understand why I have these characteristics
Yeah.
and, you know, these traits, and these really wonderful things. I mean, the thing with human beings is that we're good at a few things,
Yeah.
we're bad at a lot of things. so, so
And you know,
it's
and
realizing.
another thing that we tend to kind of inherit from our ancestors, from our parents, from our grandparents, from our great great grandparents, is trauma. So if one of them experienced something in their past, we see the consequences, we see trauma being passed on from one generation to another. And this is a cycle that needs to be, broken, because it's not healthy. It leads to so many underlying issues, and it has to
Yeah, you know, this leads on this leads us on to the concept of consciousness and unconsciousness.
end.
So most of what we do is actually unconscious.
Yeah,
So traumas of the past is passed to us unconsciously.
yeah,
So from a psychoanalytical point of view, you have the conscious, which is where the ego resides.
yeah.
So if you think of it like the iceberg, above the water is your consciousness,
Mm,
below the water is the unconscious. And an iceberg is bigger below the water than it is above the water. So it's like a
definitely.
triangle.
Yeah,
You know, the tip of the triangle is your consciousness,
yeah,
and that's where your ego resides. And your ego is your I-ness. So whenever you say I, that's your ego talking. And you develop that around, you know, the age of 7, where you start developing yourself. You become self-centered.
yeah.
You become self-obsessed. You know, that's the ego talking.
Mm,
And you need that in order to um, delineate yourself from other people. You know,
yeah,
there is a spiritual realm, but then there's a physical realm, and you need a strong ego to identify with yourself. Anyway, so we most of what we do tends to be unconscious.
right.
Okay. And the unconscious, according to some psychoanalysts, is essentially connected. So there is a kind of a collective unconscious,
Mm,
and it tends to be very strong.
yeah,
And it's culturally related, and it's religiously related as well.
yes, definitely.
And the driving force tends to be images. So
Mm,
image is a very powerful force which controls our unconscious. But let's stick with sort of your individual unconscious. Now you get those unconscious from who? From other unconsciouses, and they tend to be from our parents and grandparents and so on.
Yeah.
You don't realize these things
Mm.
because you're consciously. I'm consciously talking to you, and I'm bringing in my focus onto you. That's my conscious self. Everything else is happening unconsciously.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you have, the name of the game is to become more conscious of your unconscious.
And how do we do that?
Well, do you know when you get triggered,
Yes.
or when you get upset, or when you get angry,
Mm-hmm.
or when you get really, really happy?
Yeah.
So extremes of emotions.
Yes.
That's when you become conscious of something unconscious.
Because it has triggered a memory or something we have experienced in
It's
the
triggered
past.
you
Yeah.
because your conscious realizes that something new has come from your unconscious
Right.
and has disrupted your conscious, and the conscious doesn't like that. It wants everything to be normal and steady and calm.
Mm.
But the unconscious, I think, it's to do with ruh, which is the soul,
Yeah.
or psychoanalytically what we call the psyche. Allah
Yeah.
subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us messages through the psyche. Allah
Mm.
subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ar-Ruh min amru Rabbi. So, the actual nature of ruh is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He gives us messages through the psyche, through the unconscious, to us consciously. So when we do get triggered, when we get upset, when we get frustrated, we get really angry, we're not ourselves.
Yeah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us something. That there is something unconscious that you need to be conscious about. Analysts talk about dreams. Dreams are very powerful.
Yes. This is why we have
Dreams
this
are,
idea of dream interpretation in Islam.
dreams is the unconscious telling you something.
Mm.
Now,
Yeah.
what it tells you, God knows.
Mm.
But there's a message there. There's a symbol there. It comes back to symbols again.
Yes.
This is a symbol that the unconscious is telling you something. And you need to interpret it.
Yeah.
You need to know why I was wearing this orange dress.
Mm.
What was it about this orange dress? What is the orange dress trying to tell me?
Yeah.
Why did my house turn from a small shack, and then I did a majlis in my small shack, and it turned into a palace?
Yeah.
What is this dream telling me?
Mm.
What is this dream symbolizing me? And it's not something that you get from like just one answer.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think what's important, and hopefully brothers and sisters can do, is actually to keep a dream journal next to them.
Yes. Yeah.
So whenever they wake up, and normally dreams, you can remember dreams in the first 5 minutes that you
And
wake
then you
up,
forget. Yeah.
and then you forget.
Mm.
So if you have a vivid dream which right, this is significant, this is telling me something, write it out, whatever you can, or record it, and just put it to one side. And subhanallah, after you've had an incident,
Yes.
you've had an argument with the wife, the husband, there's been a problem at work,
Mm.
you've had a problem in your business, something tells you, oh, do you remember that dream?
Yeah.
Oh yes, you take it out, and then special things happen. This is the realm of the non-science.
What
It's
about
not
the ones that are recurrent? Lots of people, they
very
say this,
important.
they tend to see the
It,
same dream over and over again.
yeah, it means consciously you're blocking it.
Wow. Okay.
The unconscious is keep sending you messages,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just blocking it. Anything that you block just comes flooding back even worse. I mean, it's a bit like a dam. The dam works to a certain extent, but eventually,
Yeah.
what happens in the dam? You've got to open the dam eventually. You
Mm.
can let it trickle in, and that's fine. At least there is some kind of, but eventually it'll just burst,
And what about
and
the
it'll cause
ones that are
devastation.
predictive in nature, as in something is bound to happen or something may happen in the future, and they have kind of predicted it already through
Yeah,
dreams.
so some people know that they're clairvoyants.
Hmm.
So some people uh, are they have yaqeen inside that they can predict the future. Why? Because they've had so many incidents where they've had dreams
Yeah.
and they know what it means, and then it happens.
Mm.
They have another dream, they know what it means, and it happens. So this becomes a pattern.
Yeah.
That's what they're good at. Some people are good at telling you what's going to happen.
I think some people
Um,
have a really strong intuition as well. It's like they get a, this,
yeah,
gut
yeah.
instinct,
That's a
this feeling.
personality
Yeah.
type.
Mm.
That's a personality type. So we do have different personality types. Some people are
Yeah.
more thinkers. Some people are more feeling. Some people more intuition,
Mm.
because they've reached a stage where they know their intuition works and they
Yeah.
trust their intuition so much
Mm.
that it always works for them. And then when it doesn't work, they realize that that wasn't an intuition, that was another function in their personality.
Right.
We
Mm.
all realize that we're good at something
Yeah.
and we should stick with that, but
Mm.
then realize that everything else around us, we have no clue what's going on whatsoever. And
How
most of the
can we
controls,
connect with fitra? How can, lots of people, they say, oh, we feel empty inside, we can't connect with our inner self. Um,
they're connecting to the wrong things.
mm.
That's what it is. I think honesty is the biggest thing, and for them to say that they're not connected to their fitra
Yeah.
means they're being honest about themselves. That the fitra that they perceive is not the right fitra, but
Right.
there is another fitra for you.
Mm.
Okay, because there's many fitras, you see, and there isn't just one fitra. This particular one that you perceive that you should be, or is given to you, or within the structure that you were built up upon. Now it's
Mm.
time to form another structure. Now it's time to move on to something else. Um,
Right.
but it's not easy to move on. It's
No.
not easy to change, because you're moving away from the conscious and going into the unconscious, into the unknown. So dreams are really important. The other thing that is unconscious driven is creative work. So anything that's done creatively. So art is such a powerful way
Mm.
of the unconscious speaking to you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, whatever art speaks to you, which could be paintings, which could be literature, which could be movement, which could be film,
Mm.
music, whatever, anything that talks to your creative side, because the unconscious is creative driven,
Yes.
because it's in touch with the original creator.
Mm.
So it's a creative driven process. Anything that talks to you creatively, that's telling you something.
And now we also
That's
have poetry therapy and art therapy to help people
Yeah.
feel
So what
better.
it's saying,
Yeah.
what it's saying, that there is science in this.
Mm.
There is traction in this. There is something that works in art,
Yeah.
and it's not something that. And I think so. I think for us, as the Islamic faith, I think we need to go more into imagery rather than just staying with the spoken word.
Yeah.
I think it does give us. I mean, that's my personal opinion. Other people feel that the spoken word and just letters means a lot to them, but for me personally, I think imagery is really powerful, and it tells a lot about your unconscious, and what drives you and what makes you, and what doesn't make you. Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to know, do you feel there is any connection with psychoanalysis and ilm al-nafs, or do you think they are two separate things
No,
completely?
I think it's part and parcel, pretty much. I
Uh-huh.
think it's exactly the same thing. We shouldn't be discouraged by the Western
Yeah.
psychoanalysis, which is to do with, essentially Sigmund Freud and, the sort of,
Yes.
the work that he did around, the psychosexual aspects
Yeah. Yeah.
of development.
Mm.
One must realize that he was talking to a Victorian age, which was steeped in suppression and repression.
Mm.
Um, Whereas, we have a very rich culture of expression
Yes.
rather
Yeah.
than repression or suppression. And I think if we can add to that imagery and artistry, I
Mm.
think it becomes very, very colorful
Yeah.
and, very, very visual and very, very rich, because we all come from different cultures and different backgrounds. And, ethnically, we're very, very diverse. And it's a great opportunity for us to all come together and, be one true ummah, uh, going towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And we see this influence for those people who travel to the Middle East, who have been to Iraq or Iran or, Syria, Morocco, and all. They can see this influence in the architecture, in the way the buildings are designed, the holy shrines. You can see the artwork, the tile work, paintings, color combinations. There's this influence of faith with a combination of, creativity, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's
I mean,
very
it's really
unique in
important.
itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's sort of one of the unique histories in human history where you truly had multicultural diversity,
Mm,
yeah, at work, and
yeah.
it flourished. It flourished because it
Yes.
talked to the soul.
Mm. And it does boost your mood. It definitely does when you take a
It
break
opens
and
you up.
yeah, it does. Yeah,
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 yeah. So, this is the ideal opportunity to sort of think about opening up inside and sort of internally.
yeah.
Um, and Yeah, I'm looking forward to opening up inside.
Tell me more about psychoanalysis, because you see, most people, the first thing that comes to their mind is Freud, and let's agree that most people are not really fond of his views. But how
Yeah,
is it useful in treating mental health related difficulties?
yeah. I quite like Freud's theories for sure, because I think his aspect of pleasure development and pleasure theory is very relevant for all of us, because a lot of our sort of psychology is pleasure driven
Yeah.
rather than fear based.
Mm,
Um, how does it help you in terms? You start learning about yourself,
right.
okay, and once you realize that this is a part of you, so it's not actually a mental illness that you're having some distress or some uneasy thoughts or uneasy behaviors or uneasy existence
Mm,
which your conscious can't deal with, and
right.
it needs to find answers. So that's the kind of state that you're in. So whether you're hearing voices or seeing things,
Mm,
there is a disrupt in your consciousness and in your ego, and the unconscious has broken through, let's say, your ego balloon.
right.
So your ego balloon has kept yourself sane, so to speak,
Mm,
but now it can't do that anymore, and the unconscious has come through, and it's making you see things, and so that's in the extreme side of things. That's what you call psychosis.
yeah,
uh,
delusions and
yeah,
hallucinations.
and hallucinations, and your typical scientific psychiatrist will give you drugs to dampen down everything.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
don't actually deal with why it's happening.
Mm,
They just dampen your whole brain system down
yeah.
for you to kind of essentially accept it, and then you kind of work with it. Whereas from a psychoanalytical point of view, you analyze why these things are happen.
Hmm.
You know, um, so what are the voices telling you? Where does it come from?
Unfortunately, in most Muslim communities, instead of going and seeking professional help if somebody is hearing voices or seeing things, instead of accepting it as a form of psychosis or hallucinations or delusions, they'll jump into conclusions and associate it with jinn possession or something which is unseen.
I think
Uh,
that's really good. I mean, to be honest, I mean, I'd love to sort of analyze these things, jinn possessions. It has a basis, you see, it has a basis. There's a reason behind that. So it's important to actually sit down with this and look at the reasons about the jinn and where it comes from and how it comes from and what's the cultural basis of it, what's the what we call archetypical basis behind it, which means that there's an underlying mythology
yeah,
behind this. There's an underlying story behind this, which is perpetuating it. There's an underlying unconscious current that's making this happen. So I think, we shouldn't just brush it under the carpet,
hmm,
because these drugs are quite powerful.
yeah,
And, there is an argument that it doesn't actually make you any better. But that's something for me and the psychiatrist to sort of have
yeah,
with. Now, drugs are good in the short term.
hmm,
So if you are going through depression and you
yeah,
can't get out of bed,
hmm,
then these drugs can help you get out of bed.
yes,
But then you do need to do the work.
of
The
course.
drugs don't change you; you change yourself through the drugs. So
Hmm,
the change is always coming from you.
yeah,
But we should go away from this one pill for everything,
hmm,
and it will help you within 2 weeks or 6 weeks, because we know that McDonald's is nice, but it's not going to make my life happy.
yeah,
Make you happy
or
for
my
five
body.
minutes. Yeah, I mean, what are the ill effects afterwards?
Yeah,
So yeah, it's that tends to be the extreme side of things.
right.
But generally speaking, people that sort of come, let's say, have kind of lost their mojo.
Hmm,
They've lost their spark, and they don't know what it is,
yeah,
and they want to find it again.
hmm,
Um, so they do tend to be people who are a bit uh, disillusioned with their careers or relationships or
yeah,
where they are in life. Maybe they're unhappy that they're getting older. They've reached middle age. They can't do the things that they did back in their 20s and 30s or 40s. So it's sort of finding their purpose and finding their meaning in life again.
or maybe it's
So
just fear that's holding them back, fear of the
so yeah,
unknown. And
yeah,
it's good to be in
yeah,
your comfort zone because you know what the problems are that you're facing, but to
yeah,
come out of your comfort zone and, like you mentioned, change itself is a
yeah.
difficult
I
process.
mean, there's always the unconscious will always have access to you. So at any time
Yeah,
it can destroy your foundations, which is quite scary. But
yeah,
then
yeah,
that's the way that we've been made up. We haven't been made up to be on this steady state for long,
yeah,
because the only time you have a steady state is when you're dead. That's the only
yeah.
time you're a flat line.
Mm.
There's always ups and downs going on a constant basis,
And that's a
and
sign of life.
that's life. That's
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
Always, things making you come out of your comfort zone. And um it sounds unfair, but that's the way it goes.
You said something that reminded me of a saying of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, that the answers that you seek are within you. And
Yeah,
that's a very powerful statement that he has made. But I think we need to
yeah, we should go
understand the
away from
context.
experts. We should go away from experts. There is
Mm.
no experts about you,
Yeah.
but there are guides.
Mm.
Sometimes the guide cannot be the typical guide. It could be the bird or the child or
The
this
bird.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah, or this painting or
Yeah.
this piece of literature. But what that means is that the answers is not with the experts or the professional.
Yeah.
It's actually within you, which is
Yeah.
why I think sitting down and sort of analyzing this with the person being the primary analyst, and then someone who may have a bit of knowledge in symbols and mythology and sort of all of the esoteric work,
Yeah. Yeah.
mysticism.
Yeah, I would like to talk about that too, how that is linked with our mind, with our psyche, with the way we
I think
perceive
it's
the
very
world.
linked. I think it's very linked. It is a personal journey. I think there
Yeah.
are many things that brings us together, many things that we have commonality in, and that's why we identify with each other, because of this commonality.
Yeah.
And it tends to be cultural and religious and language,
Mm.
and similar ideas, and that's what brings us together. But essentially, your journey is a personal journey, and that's what mysticism's about. It's your
Yeah.
personal journey inside. um so it is it's lovely to know that this is a personal endeavor for yourself.
Do you think this is the reason why there is a lot of emphasis in our faith on doing muhasaba, muraqaba, to spend time alone, reflect on things, on ourselves, because it's all part of growth.
Yeah, I mean, just like it's part and parcel of cleaning every day and washing every
Mm.
day, so doing the physical side of things, which is
Yes.
just as important. On the flip side, because everything is a flip side, when we say the shadow, you have the non-shadow, which is your, what we call, the persona.
Yeah.
So everything has a flip side. Dark is always light, and feminine is always masculine, and up is always down,
Mm.
and physical, you always have the metaphysical. So it's bringing these opposites together, and that's what it's about. Is you're able not to concentrate on one side, because if you concentrate on one side, you lose the balance, and then you get a pathology, something that's, you get a disorder, so to speak.
Mm.
But even disorder, you need to realize that there is a order, and then there is a chaos, and you
Yes.
need the chaos in order to make the order work. If there's
Mm.
too much order, you have a tyranny. If you have too
Yes.
much chaos, you have lots of creativity, but nothing gets done. So it's sort of part and parcel. It's two hands together, um, and definitely, yeah, definitely. The more outside work you do, you need to do similar inside work. If you do too much inside work, then you'll neglect the outside work. Um, You just
Yeah.
remind me I need to do the garden because I've neglected it for a long time.
When you look at the lives of the holy household, the Aima Ahl Bayt alayhim salam, um, people often say that because they had a purpose, they were on a mission, it was easy for them to stay focused. But for us, people who are prone to mistakes and errors and sins, we
Yeah.
don't have that infallibility. We can't be like them. But then, how can you strive to be like them or follow their footsteps if we have so many, shortcomings and weaknesses and obstacles?
What you said was really important. They had a mission.
Mm.
Their vision was clear.
Yeah.
And any human being, when your vision is clear, when your purpose is clear, when
Mm.
your meaning is clear, it becomes very straightforward. A human being can't function without meaning or
Mm.
purpose.
Yeah.
And for them, it was very clear for them. It was yaqeen.
Yes.
And for many people, they do great work because their vision is very clear.
Yeah.
And then they lose the vision, or then the vision changes. And then that's when they get the physical and the psychological problems.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
my answer is be very clear about where you want to go, what you want to do, and what is the purpose and what is the meaning. And for some reason, I don't know why, if that vision or purpose has nothing to do with you, it tends to be better
Yeah.
than a vision that has to be about you. Um, which is why the whole concept around careers and striving for professional careers
Mm.
works to a certain extent, but then it falls after a bit.
Because
So,
it's empty of, sometimes passion, or there's no purpose, there's no mission. It's just something you're doing for the sake of it.
I mean, it
That's-
works to a certain extent. I mean, the West is driven by that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's all about personal purpose and meaning. But once it goes beyond you and it sort of takes on a more symbolic meaning and a more metaphysical meaning,
Yeah.
then it expands a lot more. And once it expands, the possibilities are greater and the potential is
Definitely.
greater.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's more fun as well, when you involve more people.
Yeah. Yeah. One important thing you have learned in life, through your own personal experience, is something that helped you in kind of get back again and go
I
on.
mean, yeah, don't take anything seriously. I think the times when I've got really frustrated and angry and not well and depressed and not happy is when I took it way too seriously. I think um, being lighthearted is
Yeah.
is really really important. And whenever I'm lighthearted and you know um, life can get very serious, particularly when you're a doctor and you're from this family and you're from this area and you're from this part of the world,
Yeah.
and there's sort of too much weight and formality.
Hmm.
And I've realized that the less formality and more jovial and lightheartedness,
Yeah.
yeah, it's relieved things a lot more, for
And
sure.
as Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali alayhi salam says, that I never saw anyone who used to smile as much as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
it
So
it lifts it lifts everyone.
yeah,
It lifts everyone, and it
definitely.
raises the spirits.
Mm.
And people realize that whatever I'm going through, it's not that bad.
Yeah,
We can
it could
always
have been
smile, and
worse. Yeah.
yeah, we can always smile. We can
Yeah.
always smile, and we can always have a bit of a little joke about it.
Mm.
That's not gonna harm.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Haidar al Hakim, for today's fantastic discussion. And inshallah, look forward to having you back again one day. Any
Thank
final
you.
messages you would like to give to our viewers who are watching right now?
I'd say please watch Warisa. She's doing an amazing job, tuning every week, and amazing smile, and always laughing, and lovely birds behind you. What more can you want?
Yeah, that's gratitude. All right, then. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And inshallah, we'll join you again next Saturday with another brilliant topic and amazing guest. Till then, look after yourself, especially your mental health. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.